Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, a leading
Oh,
member
this is
of the
great.
House Progressive Caucus. Welcome back to the show, Congresswoman. The vote on the bipartisan infrastructure framework didn't happen on Thursday because your side...
I'll get into this in just a second. But what I was going to say is, then after that, she was wearing a ring that she took an Instagram photo with. And, you know, you got to remember, when you're a senator, a lot of what you put on photographs and all that shit, that telegraphs a message to your constituents, right? And, you know, that's the thing. If you're telegraphing that message to your constituents, then they have a right to say something about it. And when she got approached about that, she said, or her office said, well, it's inappropriate to comment on a female senator's clothing choices. Like, what are you talking about? Like, since when is all this insensitive or inappropriate when you're doing it to be insensitive? You know, like, what the hell, you know?
The progressives stood firm. We're about to start a new week of negotiations. So, question, do you believe both these bills will still pass, or are we at risk of losing both of them? And would that be a price you're willing to pay?
Well, I do believe that both bills are going to pass, and I think that both bills, a big reason both bills are going to pass is because the American people supported an enormous caucus of 95 House progressives to defend these kinds of investments. Now, what I will say is that passing this so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill alone could and potentially will have net negative effects on climate. And on top of everything else, on top of the potential...
You want me to intro this, Seg? I think in this, if this is the same interview that I read about before, she actually calls out Kirsten Sinema in it, not by name, but it's pretty compelling. In addition to that, she's basically just calling out the fact that the progressives have power right now. And you know what? All these people's bullshit, these moderate Democrats that think they're going to push people around, it's a new day. Like, we don't need people taking corporate money doing our bidding. We need people that will take small dollar donations from individual contributors and do those people's biddings, you know?
Who better to ask than Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, a leading member of the House Progressive Caucus. Welcome back to the show, Congresswoman. The vote on the bipartisan infrastructure framework didn't happen on Thursday because your side, the progressives, stood firm. We're about to start a new week of negotiations. So, question, do you believe both these bills will still pass, or are we at risk of losing both of them? And would that be a price you're willing to pay?
Well, I do believe that both bills are going to pass, and I think that both bills, a big reason both bills are going to pass is because the American people supported an enormous caucus of 95 House progressives to defend these kinds of investments. Now, what I will say is that passing this so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill alone could and potentially will have net negative effects on climate. And on top of everything
I agree
else,
with that.
on top of the potential risk of not securing these generational and once-in-a-lifetime investments, the risk of doing harm to our climate right now is something that we cannot afford.
Yes, very well put. Congressman, I've been quite clear about the fact that we in the media have failed to accurately report on this bill as a $3.5 trillion package over 10 years. But your party has failed on the messaging too, hasn't it? Why don't Democrats refer to this as a $350 billion a year spending bill, just as they refer to our bloated defense budget as $700 billion a year and not $7 trillion?
I think that's an important component as well. Like, the way that the messaging is framed would change a lot. You know, when you realize that we're still spending less on these programs than we're spending on defense by a mile, like it's really stark that we want to spend so much on defense and we'll spend so much on our own people, like, or so little on our own people. It's pretty disgraceful to me. But anyways, I digress.
Over 10 years.
I wish we did. You know, I think that there's two factors for that. I think on one hand, you have very conservative Democrats and special interests that want to make this number sound very big and scary to more conservative and moderate voters. And on the other hand, you also have individuals who want to say that this is a big, a big spending to tout how unprecedented it is and how exciting it is. But the fact of the matter is that what we're discussing right now, as you say, is $350 billion. And when you look down on, for example, some of these conservatives that are trying to bring it down to the area of $1 trillion, or rather $1 trillion, that's $100 billion a year. That's the operating budget for New York City. And so imagine taking the yearly operating budget for New York City and trying to spread that all across the United States and act as though that is going to meaningfully change our lives. It's not. And that's why we have to make sure that we defend these investments.
So one of the very conservative members of your caucus, you referenced conservative Democrats, New Jersey House Democrat Josh Gottheimer, he says you're part of a small far-left faction that, quote, blocked the president's agenda. And yet the president seems to be siding with you guys who didn't endorse him in the primaries over Gottheimer and co. who did, which is kind of amusing to me. What is your response to Congressman Gottheimer?
Well, I do math. And 95, which is the number of House House progressives, is larger than 9, which is the number of Democrats who signed on to a letter threatening to sink the entire reconciliation bill back in August, demanding this vote this week for an arbitrary reason. Even the president wasn't demanding a vote this week. And so, I would wish that some of our folks were coming to the table the way that we are, but, also tensions get high in legislating and negotiating. It's a natural part of the process, and I wish him well.
Another conservative Democrat who won't come to the tables very explicitly, Senator Sinema of Arizona, is also out with a statement attacking your side for betraying the American people, engaging in stunts, she says. Arizona Democrats are upset with her, threatening her with a vote of no confidence.
I mean, I'd agree with that statement, Mike.
Famously came to office having primaried an out-of-touch conservative Democrat from the left. Should Sinema now be worried about a primary challenge come 2024? Do you think that needs to be talked about more as a way of reminding her that the pressure is on in an increasingly bluish state, Arizona?
Well, I think ultimately that is always up to the folks right there in the state of Arizona. Are they happy with their leadership? Their most recent senator that they had just elected is more progressive, fights very hard for working families. But that is ultimately up to the people of Arizona. It is a state that is increasingly Latino and Latina. It is a state where indigenous people
what do you mean increasingly?
Really just showed up and organized in incredible, remarkable ways for the presidential election. It is a place where working class populist politics is really taking off. And I think that, if you're home in Arizona, it's a question that you may want to raise.
We've talked Gottheimer and Sinema. Let's talk Manchin, the third part of that puzzle. He's talked down to you in the past as a, quote, young lady on the left, and who literally talked down to a bunch of his constituents from his luxury houseboat in D.C. this past week. That was a symbol for us there, that image. As much as he likes to troll us, though, he's kind of right, isn't he, Congresswoman, when he says Democrats are in this boat because your party didn't elect enough people to Congress in general last November, and especially people with your kind of views. Progressives didn't win enough elections. That's fair, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the opposite is fair as well, right? In that you have the frustrations, perhaps on the left, that you have conservatives in the Senate that are blocking things like universal pre-K, or free community college, or expanding Medicare. But the same very much applies to these conservatives in the Senate. They are sending off, these very angry statements, but they could have elected more conservatives to the House of Representatives. But right now we have a caucus of 95 people who are holding strong because, frankly, the House of Representatives, it is not the undemocratic or as undemocratic of a body as the United States Senate is. And so as a result, it tends to, and because our elections are every 2 years, it reflects the present moment of this country a little bit more quickly, I would say, and responsibly.
They could have elected a non-left Democrat to the White House. Oh, wait, they did. And he's not on their side. One last quick question before we take a break on this part of the interview.
Isn't that kind of funny?
We're going to talk to you after the
they all push so hard for Joe Biden, and he's actually really kind of fighting for progressive shit. And I'm baffled by it. I'm happy he is. I know we wanted to go a lot further than what he's choosing to go, but I think it's interesting that how much he's fighting for this. It's pretty cool. He pleasantly surprised me on that one.
Break as well. One last quick question on this. I hate asking this because I hate this abstract numbers debate. I know you do too. But people are wondering, would you accept less than 3.5 trillion? We're hearing a number like 2 trillion or 2.1 trillion. Is that in the realm of possibility for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez?
Well, getting down to the low twos, that is something that I think, going to be quite difficult. But when it comes to this question of 3.5, there is this matter where we do have these two holdouts in the Senate. This is a conversation for us to have.
Hello.
But again, it doesn't necessarily mean cut.
Papa Biden sure did say that shit, Mike. You're absolutely right.
Back the scale of these investments, it could mean where we say, okay, perhaps we do a 5-year infrastructure plan instead of a 10-year infrastructure plan. And that's where I think it's important to contextualize this number, because $3 trillion over 10 years is less per year than if we go $3 trillion over 5. And you can work with those numbers and have very ambitious policies if you do things like work on the timeline, or also Washington accounting is notoriously funny. How do you count a tax cut for working families, for example? Do you count that as lowered revenue or increased spending? And a lot of times that kind of accounting affects the top line without necessarily affecting the outcome of felt experience.
Just circling back to the funding debate that we were talking about before the break, Congress suddenly found $1 billion to give Israel for its Iron Dome missile defense system, which, to be clear to our viewers, is already fully funded. This was a $1 billion cherry on top. The majority of the squad, Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, voted against it. Jamal Bowman voted
you got
for
a
it.
link,
He formally
Arminius
showed the
the
other night
Wise?
because he wanted to represent his diverse constituents. You voted present, despite having criticized other House members in the past for voting present. I know you put out a statement addressing this, but can you just briefly explain to our viewers on MSNBC tonight why you voted that way? Because I'm sure you know you've come under a lot of criticism for that present vote, including from supporters of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was an extremely difficult vote, and I also think it's important that people are educated about the process of this vote. That Democratic leadership decided to fast track this funding. So when you want funding for preschool here in the United States, if you want funding for any sort of domestic priority, it must go through what feels like 80 different committee hearings, markups, etc. And here, just casually, $1 billion was fast-tracked, no committee markup. In fact, earlier that week, leadership attempted to kind of slip in an extra $1 billion into routine legislation, and I was part of the Democrats that helped to remove it because this is contentious. Now, what became very difficult during the course of the week was that my district is adjacent to Representative Bowman's, and this began to, frankly, just really become quite contentious in our community, in part due to the disingenuous messaging that both parties were advancing. You are correct in that this funding was in addition to the already fully funded Iron Dome, but Democratic leadership decided to run with the narrative that this was, in fact, to vote against it was to defund the Iron Dome, which sent many of our constituents into a panic. They called this vote, they scheduled the vote 2 hours. They called the vote 2 hours after it was announced that it was scheduled, and that lack of timing create a very volatile environment back in the district. And so it's something that has been obviously very difficult, but that is what happened that day.
I think you're right about that. No, Ben.
Was it worth doing present? Because it didn't really satisfy anyone. The supporters of Israel are mad at you for not voting for it. Critics of Israel are mad at you for not voting against it. Do you regret that?
I always consider the source when it comes to Ben Shapiro. It's the same reason I don't watch Jimmy Dore.
Of narrative, of politics, of national impact. I probably should have just gone with my value. But in the macro, which would be to vote no. But in the micro, I do believe that this created a window in our community to be able to bring all folks to the table, because my great fear is that we are going to import the same sort of contention around this issue, and we can have a progressive movement that defends Palestinian human rights, that is Muslim, Christian, Jewish, so in the micro, I believe that it created a window of opportunity for us in the Bronx, but in the macro, it was very difficult, yes.
So just before we finish, on a lighter note than Israel-Palestine, my teenage daughter reminded me of this Instagram video that you did that made me and her both laugh when you responded to Sarah Palin's criticism.
I love ham and cabbage soup. Sounds delicious.
Becca, yes, I am a mouthpiece for the people of New York's 14th Congressional District. Upset you? Well, I have help for you. Call 1-800-CRY-NOW. It's 1-800-CRY-NOW.
She's funny, dude. I think she's great.
Do you come up with this stuff yourself? Is this something you just have a habit and a like for? Do you have a whole team of people coming up with these dunks?
I really do. There's people that have all these theories that like I have some sort of intern or something on my Twitter account or on my Instagram, but I would never let someone who works for me run with that kind of messaging. It's a little too spicy, but I'll do it myself. And so, however, my Facebook my Facebook and our official account, we have teams, we have organizers that are helping us because my full-time job is not to post. Is my part-time, right?
Your full-time job is not to post, but a lot of our viewers, I'm sure, at home enjoy the dunking. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thank you for your time. We'll have to leave it there. Appreciate you coming on the show again.
Yeah, me too, Coherent. 100. I think they actually get it. Like, and in theory, here's the thing. In theory, I think a lot of people sit around and they're like, you know what? I don't want this. This is a socialist ideology or whatever, you know. But in practicality, they never think about the true benefits that it has. You know, it's this thing of like, oh, if we have a couple social programs, we're just going to turn into whole ass communist Russia. Like, you know, there are gradients in things, and we already live in a blended economy. Like, so I think sometimes the overreaction to some of that shit, it just drives me up a fucking wall, man. Because I mean, come on, guys, let's be real about it. Giving people health care, giving people the ability to like put their kids in nursery schools and in kindergarten and being able to get an education. Is this what we're calling? Is this what we're calling like communist Russia? Is this the scary shit that we should be afraid of? Because if so, damn, I'll fucking move to Russia if that's what it's all about, dude. If that's what it's all about, then hell yeah, let's go. You know, I think that line of thought is ridiculous. You invest in your populace. You invest in workers that can work better jobs, more advanced jobs, you know, people that can generate more money in their own pay, which generates more taxes, which will go back into the country. So, you know, the more money people make, the more taxes they pay, the more we can pay for these programs, and the system can lather, rinse, repeat. Yeah, I like that. You said, Coherent Dream said, that's crazy. That is the crazy thing. The VA is already basically social medicine. If it is good enough for our vets, why can the citizens get it? Don't get me going on congressional health care. And then Coherent Dreams goes on to say, if we passed a law and Congress had to have whatever health plan Joe Sixpack had, would the healthcare system get fixed overnight? Yeah, you know, I often think that would happen, you know. I think it's real interesting that you have some of these folks with these healthcare plans that are fighting so hard to get these healthcare plans for other people as well, and they really believe in that. I think that's kind of what the major difference is. I feel like I look really, really bright.